The courthouse hallway in downtown Atlanta felt unusually quiet that morning. Quiet in the way moments feel right before everything changes. Christopher Harper stood near the window in a navy suit, shoulders squared, expression steady, his confidence on full display. He held a stack of neatly arranged documents, flipping through them with the same calm precision he used to review corporate contracts. Beside him stood Violet, his fiancée, immaculate in a cream blouse and tailored skirt, her tone crisp as she whispered about honeymoon arrangements and guest lists. Christopher wasn't listening. He was focused on the paperwork that would close the final chapter of his marriage. Violet glanced up at him with an admiring smile. "Once this is over, we can finally move forward. Clean slate." He nodded, slipping the papers back into the folder. "Yes, it's time." Neither of them expected what came next. The hallway door opened quietly, but the shift in air, it drew Christopher's attention. When he looked up, he froze. Violet followed his gaze and stiffened. Victoria stepped inside, her hair pulled back, her posture poised, her expression unreadable. But that wasn't what brought the entire hallway to a standstill. She was carrying a baby. A small bundle rested against her chest, wrapped in a soft blanket, his tiny head peeking out with gentle curls and warm brown skin. His little fist twitched near his cheek. Christopher's throat closed. The world did not slow down. His heartbeat did. Violet blinked hard, disbelief washing across her face. She reached for her handbag and almost lost her grip on it. Not a sound left Christopher, but the way his chest rose and fell told the truth. He recognized what he was seeing. He recognized who he was seeing. Victoria walked with careful, steady steps. She met Christopher's gaze for a moment, not cold, not emotional, simply steady, like someone who had come prepared for impact. Christopher's pulse hammered as details collided with memory. The curls, the soft, warm complexion, the shape of the tiny fingers, his features, his child. For the first time in his life, the polished CEO looked like a man with no words. Violet whispered, breath shaking, "Christopher, is that—" But she couldn't finish. Victoria approached the bench across from them and sat. She adjusted the baby's sling gently, revealing more of the sleeping infant's face. Christopher felt his legs weaken. He took a slow, disbelieving step forward. The child stirred, turning his head slightly. The smallest sound, half sigh, half whimper, broke through the heavy silence. That tiny sound became the first climax of the moment. Nothing in the folder Christopher held mattered anymore. Nothing in Violet's future plans made sense. Nothing about the day ahead resembled what they expected. The past was here. The future was strapped to Victoria's chest. And Christopher knew, without anyone telling him, that the baby was his. His eyes filled with something raw, a mixture of shock, regret, awe, and confusion so sharp it nearly buckled him. Victoria didn't look away. She lifted her chin with quiet strength, the kind only a mother who had endured months of change could carry. She waited for his reaction, not eagerly, not fearfully, but with the resolve of someone who had already survived the hardest part. The hallway remained silent, except for the soft hum of distant voices behind the courtroom doors. What would you choose if your past suddenly appeared, controlling everything you could become? Have you ever forgiven someone who broke you in ways you didn't see coming? These questions landed in the heart of anyone watching, pulling them from the hallway floor and into the emotional core of the moment. The courtroom clerk appeared, cheerful and unaware of the storm brewing around her. "Mr. and Mrs. Harper, the judge is ready for you now." The title, Mr. and Mrs. Harper, hit Christopher like a blow. The words didn't fit anymore. They were minutes away from dissolving a marriage that had already shattered. He stepped closer to Victoria, voice trembling. "Victoria, is that my son?" The question hung in the air with the weight of a confession. Victoria looked down at the infant and gently rested her hand on the baby's back. When she lifted her eyes to meet Christopher's, her expression held truth, pain, and strength all at once. "His name is Miles," she said softly. "And yes, he's yours." Nothing else was needed. The hallway, the entire courthouse, everything shifted at that sentence. This divorce will not go the way anyone expects. A millionaire CEO will confront the consequences of choices he thought he could outrun. A newborn child will force truth to the surface, tearing down walls and revealing what was left of a broken family. Pause with me for just a second. Hit like and share a comment below. It tells YouTube to share this story with others who might connect with it. The moment holds for a beat. Christopher staring at Miles with trembling awe, Violet staring at her collapsing world, and Victoria standing firm as the ground shifts beneath them all. Welcome back to Mr. Dave Stories, where every narrative is crafted with heart, truth, and the kind of lessons life teaches us the hard way. If you're new to this space, we're grateful you're here. Please subscribe. It helps us continue creating stories that comfort, challenge, and connect us. The courthouse doors closed softly behind Victoria, leaving a hush in the hallway that felt almost unreal. She adjusted Miles against her chest, his tiny body warm and steady beneath the blanket. For a moment she just stood there, exhaling slowly, refusing to let her hands shake. The papers were signed. The judge's final words were still echoing faintly in her head, a marriage formally ended. Yet somehow that wasn't the part that rattled her most. It was Christopher's face. The look that had crossed his features when he saw their son. Not anger, not denial, but something far softer and far more complicated. Shock, yes. But underneath that, something she hadn't expected to see again, love. Or maybe longing. She wasn't sure. And she didn't want to be sure. Not yet. She stepped out of the building into the damp September air, breathing in the scent of wet pavement and distant car exhaust. Atlanta carried on around her, traffic humming, people chatting, lawyers rushing by with folders under their arms, oblivious to the private earthquake that had just taken place on the second floor of that courthouse. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She didn't check it. Not yet. Not while her heart was still so raw. She tucked Miles closer, kissed the top of his soft curls, and whispered, "You did so good, baby." His little hand twitched in response, making her chest tighten. She hadn't planned for this moment to happen today, exposing him to Christopher and Violet so abruptly. But life rarely waited for perfect timing. Today had proved that more boldly than she wanted. A breeze swept across the concrete steps as she made her way toward the sidewalk. Her body felt heavy from exhaustion, but her mind was alert, processing every detail of what had just happened. Behind her, on the courthouse steps, another door creaked open. Christopher had stepped outside. Victoria sensed him before she turned. His footsteps were hesitant, nothing like the self-assured CEO stride she had known for years. She didn't turn around, she couldn't. Not with her emotions still trembling beneath the surface, but she heard him inhale, the kind of shaky breath a person released after everything inside them cracked open. He didn't call her name, didn't approach, didn't demand answers. He just stood there. She could feel the weight of his presence like a spotlight on her back. Miles stirred again, fussing softly. She inhaled, steadied herself, and walked toward the corner where her rideshare driver was waiting. She didn't look back. The moment Victoria disappeared from view, Violet turned sharply toward Christopher. Her expression was tight, her jaw clenched, her arms crossed so stiffly it looked painful. "She had a baby," Violet said, the words clipped and sharp. Christopher didn't respond immediately. His hands were still trembling slightly, as if his body had not yet caught up with the truth. He stared at the spot where Victoria had stood moments earlier, almost afraid to blink and erase the image. "I didn't know," he finally whispered. Violet scoffed, not loudly, but with unmistakable bitterness. "You expect me to believe that?" He blinked, turning toward her, his face pale. "Violet, I swear, I didn't know. I had no idea. Christopher, that child looks just like—" "I know," he snapped, then immediately caught himself, voice softening. "I know he does." His mind was spinning. He remembered Victoria's silence these last few months, the odd way she avoided seeing him during the property sale, the loose clothing she wore that last time they met. He had chalked it up to stress, to heartbreak, to distancing herself after everything he'd done. Never once had he considered the truth. Violet watched him with tight eyes, her jaw shifting as she absorbed every flicker of emotion on his face. "This changes everything." He ran a hand through his hair, pacing a few steps, gripping the back of a bench as if trying to steady himself. "I have a son," he whispered to himself, not as an announcement, but as a realization so heavy it nearly buckled him. Violet's voice sharpened. "You should have told me. There was nothing to tell," he shot back, frustration finally breaking through. "I didn't know she was pregnant. But you were with her on your anniversary, weren't you?" The accusation struck deeper than she knew. "Yes," he admitted quietly. "We had a moment of softness, a brief one, but I never imagined that it could result in a baby." Violet hissed. He flinched. She pressed a hand to her forehead, turning away and exhaling heavily. "I need air," she muttered, stepping toward the stairs. "Violet," he called. She paused. "I have to be in that baby's life," he said, voice unsteady but resolute, "no matter what happens with us." Violet didn't turn. She simply replied, "I need space," and walked down the steps without waiting for him. The sound of her heels tapping away faded into the noise of the street. Christopher didn't follow. He couldn't move, couldn't think straight. The world had tilted on its axis, and he was still struggling to find footing. He lowered himself onto the bench and pressed his hands to his face. A father. He was a father. While he was planning a wedding, picking venues, giving interviews about his company's expansion, he had a child in the world who didn't even know his voice. A faint memory hit him. Victoria at their anniversary dinner, her eyes warm for the first time in months, the softness in her smile that night. He remembered holding her, feeling like maybe they could find their way back. He never knew that moment had created a life. He swallowed hard, guilt pressing like a weight against his chest. She had gone through the pregnancy alone, through the labor alone, through nights of uncertainty and pain and fear. Alone, because of him, because of choices he made that tore their marriage apart. He leaned back against the wall, eyes glassy. "I have a son," he whispered again. The truth settled in deeper this time, drawing out not just shock but something else, something warm and fierce and terrifying love. Unexpected love for a child he had never met until today. Victoria buckled Miles into his car seat, her hands moving automatically, her thoughts scattered. The moment she slid into the back seat beside him, she finally allowed herself to breathe, really breathe. Her driver merged into traffic and the city blurred past the window. She rested her head against the cool glass, exhaustion pushing at her eyelids. Her phone buzzed again. She glanced at the screen. "Christopher, please let me know when we can talk. Please." Victoria closed her eyes. Of course he wanted to talk. Of course he had questions. Questions she wasn't ready to answer in a courthouse hallway, with Violet standing there trying not to fall apart. She glanced at Miles, who was now awake and staring at the ceiling with wide dark eyes. His innocence grounded her. "Not today, Chris," she whispered to herself. "Today is for peace. For him." The car turned onto a quieter road, heading toward her neighborhood. The farther she got from downtown, the easier her breathing became. Homes passed by. Trees lined the sidewalks. The familiar calm of her street appeared, and her heart eased further. Miles let out a soft coo. Victoria smiled despite the lingering ache. "We're okay," she murmured. "We'll figure this out." But even as she said it, her mind drifted to Christopher's face, the way he looked at their son, like he was seeing something sacred. That image would not leave her. Back in the courthouse hallway, Christopher finally stood, wiped his face, and reached for his phone with trembling fingers. He typed a message, deleted it, typed another, deleted that too. Eventually, he sent the simplest truth he could manage. "Christopher, I'll be there tomorrow. Please give me a time. I want to do this right." He didn't know if she would respond. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. All he knew was this: he wasn't running anymore. Not from his past, not from his mistakes, not from the child who now existed in the world because of a moment he took for granted. Christopher straightened his suit jacket, inhaled deeply, and walked toward the exit. His life had just split into before and after, and tomorrow he would begin the after. Christopher barely slept that night. He lay in bed staring up at the ceiling of his penthouse, a place he once loved, a place that now felt hollow. The city lights flickered through the tall windows, but they didn't soothe him the way they used to. His mind kept circling back to one image: Victoria holding their child. His son, his flesh and blood. He turned over, punched the pillow, sat up, lay down, sat up again. Nothing felt normal, not after today, not after the truth that had unraveled his world in the most unexpected way. At around 4 a.m, he gave up on sleep and walked into the kitchen. He poured water into a glass and leaned on the counter, staring at the marble surface as if answers might appear in the reflection. A son. He whispered the word again, softly, almost reverently. A son. While he was planning a wedding, attending galas with Violet, and strengthening his company's reputation, his child had been growing in silence somewhere else, in the belly of the woman he once vowed to protect. The woman he hurt, the woman he abandoned, even if he didn't fully realize the depth of his actions at the time. He gripped the counter until his knuckles whitened. How could he have missed something so monumental? How did Victoria carry that alone? How did she endure labor without him? And how was he supposed to make up for all of it now? The questions circled his mind in a restless loop, each one cutting deeper than the last. When dawn broke, he was already dressed. Simpler clothes than usual, jeans, a clean shirt, no tie. He didn't want to walk into Victoria's home as the CEO who made headlines. He wanted to walk in as a man ready to learn how to be a father. He stopped by a florist on the way, choosing daisies because he remembered, not because she ever made it a big deal, but because she always kept them on their dining table when they were happy. Then, at a small boutique, he hesitated before picking up a soft teddy bear, unsure if it was too forward. Eventually, he bought it anyway. A child deserved gifts. A child deserved to be welcomed. A child deserved more than a courtroom shock. By the time he pulled up to Victoria's townhouse, his heart felt like it was pounding against his ribs. He took a deep breath before ringing the doorbell, holding the flowers and the teddy bear, 2 clumsy tokens of intention. Victoria opened the door with Miles in her arms. Christopher forgot how to breathe. The baby was awake, his wide, dark eyes gazing outward with innocent curiosity. His little mouth moved in a soft pout, as if trying to make sense of the world he'd been brought into a few weeks ago. He was perfect. Absolutely perfect. "Hi," Christopher managed. "Hi," Victoria replied. She looked tired, a kind of tired that came from late-night feedings and early morning cries, but she also looked strong. Stronger than she ever had. Motherhood suited her. It wrapped around her like quiet armor. Christopher offered the bouquet and the bear. These are for you, and this one's for him." Her eyes softened. "Thank you." She stepped aside. "Come in." He followed her into the living room, a warm, cozy space filled with signs of new life. A play mat, a basket of blankets, a bottle warmer on the counter, a soft lullaby playing low from a speaker. It was nothing like their sleek Buckhead condo. It felt more human. Victoria sat on the couch with Miles, gently bouncing him. "He's usually calm around this time," she said. "We'll see how long that lasts." Her attempt at light humor eased some tension. Christopher sat across from her. He didn't know what to do with his hands, so he folded them, then unfolded them, then rested them on his knees. "I didn't sleep," he admitted. She nodded. "I figured." Silence stretched between them, not angry, not awkward, just full of things waiting to be spoken. Christopher leaned forward slightly. "Victoria, he's beautiful." Her chest rose with a slow breath. "I think so too." His eyes drifted back to the baby. Is he healthy? Is everything okay?" "I don't know anything yet. I don't know where to start." She studied him for a moment, then said, "He's healthy, strong, good appetite, likes to be held, especially before naps." She paused, adjusting the baby's blanket. "He's a good baby. Calm most days." The pride in her voice made something warm crack open in Christopher's chest. He swallowed hard. May I hold him?" Victoria hesitated, only for a second, not from distrust, but from the weight of the moment. Then she nodded. "Of course." She stood and crossed the small space between them, instructing gently, "Support his head, always. He still needs help with that." He followed her guidance, his hands trembling slightly as she transferred the warm, tiny body into his arms. When Miles settled against his chest, Christopher felt the air whoosh from his lungs. This was real. This was happening. He was holding his son. Miles blinked up at him, squinting as if trying to memorize his face. Then one small hand reached up and brushed against Christopher's shirt. Christopher froze. He felt tears building behind his eyes, not the sharp, painful kind, but the kind that came from something overwhelming and pure. "Hi," he whispered, voice breaking. "Hi, buddy." The baby's mouth twitched in a little expression that could almost pass for curiosity. Christopher let out a soft laugh, shaky, disbelieving. "I can't believe you're real." Victoria sat down beside them, her expression gentler now. "He likes voices," she said. "He recognizes tone, even if he doesn't understand words yet." Christopher nodded, still staring at Miles. "I missed everything," he murmured. His first moments, the ultrasounds, the birth, his first night home. His voice cracked again. "I should have been there." Victoria exhaled slowly, the memory of carrying all that alone flickering in her eyes. "Yes," she admitted quietly. "You should have." Their gazes met, his full of apology, hers full of residual ache. "But we're here now," she added, "and Miles deserves the best of both of us." He nodded fiercely. "I want that. Whatever it takes. I'll do it." Miles began to wiggle, his little face scrunching as he fussed. Christopher panicked slightly. Oh no, what do I do?" Victoria smiled softly. "He's probably hungry." She reached out. "I'll take him." Christopher looked almost reluctant to let go, but handed the baby back gently. Victoria settled Miles in her arms and lifted her shirt just enough to nurse discreetly. Christopher immediately averted his eyes, respectful but visibly emotional. "Victoria, thank you for telling me yesterday, even if the timing was unexpected." She continued nursing, her voice calm. "It was the only moment left. I didn't want to wait any longer. I understand." He exhaled. "I want to be in his life, every day. Any way you'll allow. We'll talk about the details," she said, not cold, just cautious. "But consistency is non-negotiable. He can't have a father who comes and goes when it's convenient." "I won't," he promised. "I won't be that man." Her eyes flicked toward him briefly. "Good." After Miles finished feeding and drifted into sleep, Victoria placed him in a bassinet nearby. The baby sighed contentedly, tiny chest rising and falling beneath an embroidered blanket. For a moment, neither adult spoke. The quiet wasn't heavy, just thoughtful. Finally, Christopher whispered, "Can we start fresh, at least with the parenting part? I know rebuilding trust between us will take time, maybe a lot of time. But for him, can we start somewhere?" Victoria looked at him carefully. "Yes," she said at last. "For Miles, we can start." He nodded, relief loosening his shoulders. A slow, genuine smile touched his lips, the kind she hadn't seen in a long time. "Thank you," he said. Victoria didn't answer verbally. She just nodded again and glanced at their sleeping son. For the first time since everything shattered, there was a glimmer, a small one but undeniable, of peace. Before we continue, family, I have some exciting news to share. Recently, something happened in my own life that reminded me why stories matter. I finally understood a truth I used to ignore. Sometimes the things that break you end up becoming the things that build you. A few months ago, I went through a personal challenge that felt overwhelming, but today, I'm stronger, wiser, and more grateful than ever. That experience is what inspired me to start telling these stories. Because life teaches all of us, one lesson at a time. Morning sunlight filtered through the blinds of Victoria's living room, painting gentle lines across the carpet as Miles stirred in his bassinet. The soft hum of the bottle warmer filled the quiet space. Victoria leaned back on the couch, cradling a mug of tea between her palms. Sleep had taken her only in fragments last night, not because of Miles, who had been unusually calm, but because of the thought of Christopher holding him. That moment. It had replayed in her mind over and over like a scene she wasn't ready to unpack. She felt the air shift when a soft knock sounded at the door. Right on time. Victoria inhaled deeply. This was the part she knew had to happen, the talk they avoided yesterday because everything had been too raw, too unexpected. She set her mug down and opened the door. Christopher stood there dressed simply again, a quiet humility in his posture. No suit, no boardroom confidence, just a man trying to steady himself under the weight of a new reality. "Good morning," he said softly. "Morning," she replied. He hesitated at the doorway. "Is it okay if I come in?" Victoria nodded and stepped aside. "Yeah, come on." He entered slowly, scanning the room with the same quiet awe he had yesterday, as if everything related to Miles was something sacred. Victoria wasn't sure how to feel about that. It softened her, but it also made her guard rise higher. Miles let out a tiny sound from the bassinet, drawing Christopher's attention instantly. He moved toward him, stopping short as if respecting invisible boundaries. Victoria appreciated that. She picked Miles up and balanced him in one arm. "He just ate a little while ago. He's still a bit sleepy." Christopher nodded. "He looks peaceful." She nodded once, then turned toward the couch. "We need to talk." He swallowed visibly. "I know." They sat. Not close, not far. Just enough space between them to show this was not a reunion. This was responsibility. Victoria's tone was calm, steady, but unyielding. "Before anything else, I need you to understand something, Chris." He looked at her with full attention. "I'm listening. I raised this child for 9 months by myself. Every doctor visit, every scare, every kick, every night I wondered how I was going to do this alone. I carried all of that, emotionally, financially, physically, without you." Christopher's face tightened with shame. "I'm not saying that to hurt you," she continued. "I'm saying it because it matters. It matters for how we move forward." "I understand," he whispered. "No," she replied gently but firmly. "You don't. Not fully, and I can't expect you to. But I need you to respect the position I've had to hold. That means we're going to do this slowly. You won't walk in and out when you feel like it. You won't make promises you can't keep, and you won't try to jump into decisions before we build trust." He nodded, hard. "Okay, I accept that. And I need to say this clearly," she added. "You're not stepping into my life again. You're stepping into Miles's life. That's the only thing I'm ready for at this moment." He took in the words like a man swallowing something heavy but necessary. "I appreciate your honesty." Victoria adjusted Miles in her arms. "Good, because if we're going to co-parent, honesty is the bare minimum." Christopher leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his voice low. "I want to take responsibility for everything I missed. Not with words, with actions. I failed you, Victoria, not just as a partner, but as the father of this child. I'm not going to downplay that or pretend it's something we can gloss over." She nodded slowly, appreciating the directness. "I should have seen the signs. I should have been present. I should have been a better man. That's on me, not you." Victoria remained still, but something in her chest shifted slightly. Not forgiveness yet, but recognition. These were not excuses, these were admissions. "And I know," he continued, voice tightening, "that I can't earn your trust overnight, and I don't expect Miles to know me as his father just because I show up once." Victoria looked down at their son, who was nuzzling her shirt sleepily. "I will earn it," Christopher said, "day by day, whatever that looks like, however long it takes." She took a slow breath. "Then we're on the same page." There was a pause. the kind that felt like a door waiting to be opened. Victoria shifted slightly. Chris, when we were together, I felt alone long before the divorce paperwork ever existed. You were physically there, but emotionally absent. Your work, your ambition, it consumed everything. He nodded, eyes downcast. I remember. I was caught up in trying to prove myself. The company was growing. Investors wanted results. I thought if I built enough, accomplished enough, we'd have security. We didn't need security, she said quietly. We needed you. He flinched at the truth, and every time you chose the company over us, I felt smaller. Unseen. Alone. It wore me down. By the time we separated, I wasn't even angry anymore. I was empty. Christopher wiped his palms against his jeans. I know I caused damage. Damage I can't erase, but I don't want that old version of me anywhere near our son. Victoria nodded. Good, because he doesn't deserve that, and neither do I. He swallowed hard. I'm sorry, Victoria, for all of it. Not because I want something from you, but because it's the truth. And for the first time, she believed him. Victoria straightened her posture, shifting into the part of the conversation she had mentally prepared for. Okay, now let's talk about how this works. Christopher sat upright, attentive. First, consistency. You'll pick days and stick to them. No last-minute changes unless there's an emergency. Yes, he said. Absolutely. Second, communication. We talk only about Miles. Not about us. Not about the past. Not about anything beyond. What affects him. Understood. Third, decisions about him are joint decisions, not one-sided. He nodded again. Agreed. Fourth, respect. For schedules, for routines, for boundaries. For the fact that this home is his environment right now. I respect that, he affirmed. And lastly, she paused. We move slow. We don't rush anything. We focus on building a safe space for Miles. Christopher exhaled shakily. I can do that. You'll need to, she replied. Because if you ever fall into old habits, I will put Miles first, even if that means stepping back from whatever we try to build for him. I won't let that happen, he said, conviction rising in his voice. Victoria studied him carefully, weighing the sincerity in his posture, the quiet determination in his expression. He wasn't performing. He wasn't pushing. He was present, actually present. That alone felt different. Miles let out a soft cry, signaling he was waking again. Victoria lifted him gently, and the baby blinked his big eyes open, glancing between the two adults. Christopher leaned closer, cautious but hopeful. Hi, buddy. Miles stared at him for a moment, then yawned. Victoria almost smiled. Would you like to hold him again? She asked, surprising even herself with the offer. Christopher's face softened with gratitude. Yes, if that's okay. She guided him again, though less than yesterday, meaning something between them had already started shifting. Miles settled in his arms, and Christopher held him with a steadier grip this time, as if overnight he had memorized every instruction and carried it straight into this morning. Victoria watched them, her heart tugging in two directions, one cautious, one tender. Seeing a father bond with his child was not something she expected to witness so soon. But here they were. Miles sighed contentedly against Christopher's chest, and Christopher closed his eyes briefly, savoring the moment. This, he whispered, is what I want to show up for. Every day. Victoria didn't respond with words. She didn't need to. Her silence wasn't resistance. It was a beginning. The first real test of their new arrangement came sooner than either expected. By the end of that week, the October air had turned crisp in Atlanta, brushing the neighborhood with a gentle coolness that hinted at approaching holidays. Victoria had finally begun to sleep a little more consistently, finding a fragile rhythm with Miles. Still, the exhaustion clung to her like an extra layer of clothing. It was late in the afternoon when Christopher texted, something simple, respectful. Victoria looked down at Miles, who was awake and unusually alert, kicking lightly against her arm. She traced her thumb over his tiny sock. Let him see consistent effort, she whispered to herself. She replied, You can come by for the evening. Nothing overnight yet. Within 15 minutes there was a soft knock. Christopher stood on the porch holding 2 grocery bags and looking slightly nervous. I brought dinner. And diapers. And wipes. And this bottle warmer that had 100 good reviews, but I might have bought the wrong one because I didn't really know what I was doing. Despite herself, Victoria cracked a faint smile. Come in. He stepped inside, setting the bags down but pausing before touching anything else, waiting, she realized, for her guidance. That was new. That humility, that awareness. Miles let out a gentle babble from the playmat, and Christopher's face brightened instantly. He crouched beside him, wiggling a soft rattle Victoria had placed near his hand. Hey, buddy, he murmured. Remember me? Miles blinked, considered him, then released a sound that was almost a laugh. Christopher swallowed visibly. "I'll take that as a yes." Victoria watched from the counter as she unpacked the groceries he'd bought. There were basic ingredients, chicken, rice, vegetables, but also things she liked specifically. Her favorite tea. A box of those caramel cookies she used to snack on when they were married. She frowned faintly. Had he really remembered that? When she turned back, she found Christopher lifting Miles gently, supporting him with the sort of tentative confidence that only came after careful practice. The sight nudged something warm inside her, but she tucked it away. Tonight was about responsibility, not emotion. As the evening unfolded, Victoria drifted through memory, not because she wanted to, but because these moments, these small tender interactions between father and son, reminded her of a life she once imagined. She remembered Christopher cooking for her early in their marriage, not the burned attempts or the rushed efforts, but the nights he'd dance around the kitchen while stirring pasta, kissing her cheek as though the world made perfect sense. She remembered their laughter in the condo, the way they'd stay up late with candles lit, talking about future children they hoped to have. Those memories hurt now, but they also reminded her of the version of Christopher she had once loved, the version she thought she had lost. And yet, here he was, not perfect, not redeemed, not forgiven, but present. Something she hadn't felt from him in years. By 7 o'clock, Miles was fighting sleep, wriggling, fussing, refusing to settle. Victoria reached for him automatically. Christopher stopped her gently. "Let me try." She hesitated. That was always the moment she stepped in, the moment when exhaustion and instinct collided. But tonight she nodded. Christopher lifted Miles, rocking him slowly as he paced the living room. His voice was soft, unpolished but warm. "I know you're tired, little guy. It's okay. I've got you." Victoria sank onto the couch, observing carefully. She wasn't ready to say it aloud, but she admired the patience he was showing, something he had lacked in their marriage. Christopher had always been quick to frustration when things didn't go according to plan. But with Miles, he seemed willing to slow down, to meet the moment without rushing. And then it happened. Miles finally fell asleep on Christopher's shoulder. Victoria felt something settle in her chest, not reconciliation, not resolution, but a softer breath she hadn't expected to release. Christopher whispered, "I didn't want to mess this up." "You didn't," she replied, quietly. He turned slightly toward her. "Thank you for trusting me with him." Victoria looked away before the weight of his gratitude pulled her into emotions she wasn't ready to face. "Just keep up the effort." "I will," he promised. When Miles was finally settled in the bassinet, Victoria stepped into the kitchen to warm a mug of tea. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, not from anger, but from the overwhelming swirl of responsibility and memory inside her. Her eyes stung before she realized tears had begun to gather. She pressed a palm to her forehead, breathing slowly. Motherhood had changed her in ways she hadn't anticipated. It had made her tougher, more determined, unwilling to accept anything less than what her child deserved. But it had also made her raw, her emotions closer to the surface, her heart more exposed. The soft clink of the mug startled her. She looked up to see Christopher stepping in quietly. "You okay?" he asked, voice gentle. She turned away, wiping her cheek. "I'm fine, just tired." He hesitated, then said softly, "You don't have to be strong all the time, Vic." Her jaw clenched. "Yes, I do. I had no choice. I know," he murmured. "I know you carried everything, and I'm not asking to take over. Just to lighten the load, if you'll let me." Victoria closed her eyes briefly. "Consistency, Chris. That's all I need to see. Words aren't enough. I'll prove it," he said. "Tonight, tomorrow, every day." She didn't respond, but she didn't walk away either. Later that night, the test truly unfolded. Miles woke again around 9, crying harder than usual, his tiny body tense and unsettled. Victoria reached him first, but Christopher was right beside her. "I think he's overstimulated," she murmured. "I'll walk him," Christopher offered, already reaching. She nodded, letting him take the lead. While he paced with Miles, Victoria watched, then drifted again into memory. She remembered nights waiting alone in their condo, wondering if Christopher would come home before she fell asleep. She remembered questioning her worth, doubting her role in her own marriage. She remembered crying into a pillow so quietly that no sound escaped, because she didn't want him to hear if he happened to walk through the door. Those nights had shaped her into the guarded woman she was now, steady, protective, unwilling to let another heartbreak undo her. But motherhood had revealed her strength too. She had survived the emotional collapse of her marriage and the physical trial of childbirth alone. She had risen each morning to nurture a child she adored beyond words. She had become someone she respected. Tonight, watching Christopher soothe Miles with unwavering patience, she realized something unexpected. He was becoming someone he respected too. When Miles finally settled around 11, Christopher gently tucked him in, then turned to Victoria with a tired but grateful expression. "You did great tonight," she said before she could stop herself. His eyebrows lifted in surprise. "Thank you. I want to get this right." "You're trying," she replied. "That matters." There was a subtle shift, the kind of shift that wasn't romantic or sentimental, but foundational. A shift where two adults acknowledged their roles not as former spouses, not as broken partners, but as parents learning a new rhythm. As Christopher grabbed his jacket to leave, he paused at the doorway. "Can I come by tomorrow?" he asked. "Same time?" Victoria studied him closely. Not the man she married, not the man who betrayed her, but the man who had spent the last 6 hours proving something with more than words. "Tomorrow is fine," she said. His relief was visible. "I'll be here. Thank you, Vic." She closed the door softly behind him, leaning her forehead against the wood for a moment. She let out a long, quiet breath, feeling the exhaustion of the day melt into something gentler. Hope, not a promise of reconciliation, not forgiveness, just hope. A small, steady ember, fragile but alive. Miles shifted in his sleep, and Victoria walked to him, brushing a finger along his cheek. "We're figuring it out, little man," she whispered. Slowly. "But we're getting there." And for the first time in a long time, she believed it. The next afternoon arrived, with a warm beam of sunlight stretching across Victoria's living room floor. She had barely finished tidying the baby bottles when she heard the knock on her front door, right on time. Not late, not early. Exactly the moment he said he would arrive. Consistency. She noticed it immediately. When she opened the door, Christopher stood there with a nervous smile, sleeves rolled slightly at the wrists, holding a grocery bag with a confidence that felt rehearsed. "I brought everything to make dinner," he said. "Or at least, I'm prepared to fail trying." Victoria stepped to the side. "We'll see how that goes." It wasn't quite a smile, not fully, but it held softness, enough to keep him grounded. Miles was in his little swing by the couch, kicking lightly, his eyes brightening the moment he heard his father's voice. "Hey, buddy," Christopher greeted warmly, walking over and crouching beside him. "I missed you today." Miles offered a gurgling sound that was almost a reply. Victoria exhaled quietly. She didn't want to romanticize anything, but watching them together stirred something warm and familiar. Not love, not yet, but a sense of connection she hadn't expected to feel again. Later, while Christopher washed his hands at the kitchen sink, Victoria leaned against the counter, arms loosely folded. "You're cooking tonight?" she asked. "That's the plan," he said confidently. "I downloaded 3 recipes, all supposedly easy. But that's what the internet claims, so we'll see." She raised an eyebrow. "You burning down my house will not help your case." He laughed under his breath. "No fires, I promise." He laid out ingredients: chicken, spices, fresh vegetables, pasta. He looked organized, almost overly so. She recognized the nervousness in his movements. He wanted to impress her, to show change, to prove something quietly he didn't dare say aloud. The first challenge came quickly. He couldn't open the jar of garlic paste. Victoria watched him struggle silently for a full minute, his jaw tightening, his hand twisting with determination. Finally, she walked over, took the jar, tapped the lid twice on the counter, and it opened instantly. He blinked. "How did you—" "Motherhood grants new powers," she said calmly, handing it back. Christopher shook his head, smiling sheepishly as he resumed chopping vegetables without further question. Despite the lightness of the moment, Victoria stayed vigilant. One good evening did not erase the past. One consistent day did not rebuild trust. She was hopeful, but she was not naive. Still, it was hard to deny that tonight felt different. Christopher wasn't distracted. His phone wasn't buzzing. His eyes were never drifting elsewhere. He was present, fully. Once dinner was simmering, he leaned against the counter beside her. "I've been thinking a lot," he said quietly, "about everything." Victoria stayed silent, waiting. "I realize now that I spent more time trying to be the perfect CEO than trying to be a good husband," Christopher continued. "I know an apology doesn't erase things, but I need you to know I see it clearly now. The nights I wasn't there, the conversations I didn't have, the times you needed me and I chose work instead." Victoria's breath caught. Words like these had once been everything she wished for, but now they were simply acknowledgments of truth. "I needed a partner," she said softly. "Not someone who remembered our relationship only when he was reminded." He nodded, absorbing it. "I know. I'm trying to become the man I wasn't back then. Not to win you back, but to be someone worthy of being in Miles's life every day." This time she nodded, slowly. Good. No promises, no forgiveness, just space to grow. Dinner turned out surprisingly edible, a little too salty but flavorful. Victoria watched Christopher nervously anticipate her reaction as she took a bite. "It's good," she said simply. He exhaled with comedic relief. "I won't take that for granted. I know how honest you are when food is bad." She smirked slightly. "You burned toast once and insisted it was extra crispy. I was trying to impress you. You failed." He laughed again, the sound warm and familiar. Small steps, steady steps. After dinner, Christopher volunteered to give Miles a bath. Victoria hesitated. Bath time was a sacred routine, not because it was complicated, but because it was bonding. She had performed it alone for weeks, gently lowering her son into warm water while humming soft tunes her mother used to sing. "Are you sure?" she asked. "I'd like to try," he replied, "if you don't mind guiding me." She nodded slowly. In the bathroom, Victoria filled the small tub while Christopher gently undressed Miles, whispering soothing nonsense words as he worked. "You look nervous," she observed lightly. "I'm terrified," he admitted. The honesty softened something inside her. He lowered Miles into the water hesitantly. When the baby squeaked in response, Christopher nearly panicked. "That's normal," Victoria assured him. "Wow, okay," he breathed, regaining composure. "Thought I ruined bath time forever." "Keep going," she teased. He washed Miles carefully, his hands steadying with each pass of the cloth. By the time he wrapped Miles in a warm towel, his confidence had begun to bloom. "Not bad," Victoria told him. "High praise," he said with mock pride. But beneath the humor, she saw the truth. He needed her approval, not for ego, but because he wanted to be good at this. Needed to be. Later, as they settled on the couch, Miles fed from a bottle Christopher held, his tiny hand gripping Christopher's thumb. "Do you ever think about the early years of our marriage?" Christopher asked gently, eyes focused on Miles. Victoria stiffened. "Sometimes," she said truthfully. "There were good moments, and moments I didn't realize were warning signs." He nodded. "I think about them too. I think about the man I was, the choices I made. And I wonder why it took losing everything to see clearly." Victoria's eyes softened despite her guard. "You didn't lose everything," she murmured. "You still have him, and you still have a chance to be better." Christopher swallowed hard. "I'm grateful for that chance, more than I can ever say." Miles's small face relaxed into sleep again, his breathing soft and steady. Christopher watched him with an expression that glowed from somewhere deep inside, a tenderness that was unmistakably real. Victoria saw it. She believed it. And that scared her. Not in a way that made her run, but in a way that made her step carefully, knowing that hope, once regained, could break a heart twice as hard if mishandled. The night ended with awkwardness. The good kind. The kind that hinted at change but didn't rush toward it. At the door, Christopher adjusted his jacket and cleared his throat. "Same time tomorrow?" he asked. "Yes," she said before she could overthink it. He blinked, surprised at how easily she answered, then smiled with a quiet relief that warmed the entryway. "I'll be here." She nodded. "Drive safe." As he stepped off her porch, Victoria watched him go, walking with a lighter stride than he had the first day he returned to her doorstep. She closed the door slowly, her heart full and uncertain, not healed, not reopened, but unfolding, one careful step at a time. She turned toward the living room where Miles slept peacefully, his tiny chest rising and falling in the soft glow of the lamp. "We're going to take this slow," she whispered, brushing her fingers over his cheek. "But maybe, just maybe, things really can change." Outside, somewhere in the quiet evening, Hope took another small breath. This story reminds us that forgiveness grows in places we least expect. If you've ever forgiven someone, or wished someone forgave you, drop a comment. You might help someone feel less alone today. For nearly 2 weeks, Christopher showed up every single day at the exact time he promised, not a minute late, not once distracted. It didn't matter whether he had spent the day in back-to-back boardroom meetings or was running on 4 hours of sleep. He came, and he came with intention. That consistency built something inside Victoria she hadn't expected. Space, just space, the breathing room to feel, to notice, to think. On a cool Friday afternoon, that space opened wider than ever. The sunlight filtered through the living room blinds, casting soft lines across the carpet where Miles lay kicking on his blanket. Victoria sat cross-legged beside him, gently shaking a toy in front of him. He babbled happily, reaching for her finger with pure fascination. A knock sounded. Right on time. She opened the door to find Christopher holding 2 cups from a local cafe in Midtown. I grabbed these on my way. One is your usual, chai with honey." Victoria blinked. "You remembered that?" I remember everything about you, he said before he could stop himself. A pinch of something flickered across her chest, but she steadied her breath and stepped aside. Thanks. He entered quietly, eyes immediately drifting to Miles. You ready to see your dad again, buddy? Christopher asked, lowering himself to the floor. Miles responded with a wide grin and an excited kick. Victoria watched the scene unfold, her son's instant delight, Christopher's soft laugh, the easy rhythm forming between them. And for the first time since the courthouse, she let herself acknowledge something she had been pushing away. Christopher wasn't performing, he wasn't pretending. This wasn't guilt-driven obligation. It was genuine. He was rebuilding from the ground up, not with speeches or grand gestures, but with quiet devotion. After a few minutes of playtime, Victoria stood, brushing invisible lint from her leggings. She needed air. Something inside her was shifting, crowding her chest. Do you want to take him for a walk? She asked. It's nice outside. Christopher looked up, surprised by the offer. A walk? With both of you? She nodded. Yes, just around the block. His face softened. I'd like that. Victoria slipped Miles into the stroller and zipped his little jacket. They stepped outside together onto the sidewalk, the breeze carrying the scent of autumn leaves and something faintly sweet from a neighbor's porch candle. The Atlanta air was cool but pleasant, the kind of weather that made everything feel calmer. They walked side by side, not touching, but close enough that she could sense the warmth of his presence. They turned onto a quiet street lined with oak trees. For a while neither spoke. It wasn't awkward silence, it was settling, like dust after a storm. Christopher finally broke it. Vic, can I ask you something? She kept her eyes forward. Depends on the question. What was the hardest part for you? While we were apart, Victoria slowed her steps. She hadn't expected him to go there. Not today, not like this. Hardest part, she repeated softly. He nodded. I want to understand. I don't deserve the answers, but I want to understand them. They reached a bench by a small neighborhood park entrance. She stopped, rested her hands on the stroller handle, and breathed in slowly. It wasn't one thing, she began, eyes drifting to the stroller canopy where Miles kicked lightly. It was layers of hurt, being alone in the apartment, hearing you on that balcony with someone else, packing the condo by myself, signing papers with a baby growing inside me that I couldn't tell anyone about yet. She paused, steadying her voice. I felt abandoned, not just as a wife, but as a woman, as a human being you once claimed to love. Christopher's throat tightened visibly. Victoria, she held up a hand. Let me finish. He nodded quickly, eyes already damp. I kept telling myself I wasn't enough, that something about me made it easy for you to walk away. I replayed everything in my head, the good, the bad, trying to find the moment when we stopped being us. Christopher lowered his gaze. I'm so sorry. I was blind and selfish and cowardly. You were, she agreed quietly, but I also blame myself for staying quiet, for letting things slide, for ignoring the warning signs because I didn't want to admit my marriage was crumbling. She swallowed hard. Forgiveness isn't easy for me anymore, not after what happened. Christopher nodded slowly. I know, and I'm not asking you to rush it. She looked at him then, really looked. He wasn't the polished CEO with the perfect smile and perfect posture. He looked human. He looked humbled. He looked like he had been walking through his own wreckage and hadn't shied away from the sharp edges. Your turn, she said gently. What was the hardest part for you? He blinked, startled. Me? Yes, you lived your own storm, didn't you? He exhaled shakily and sat on the bench. She stood beside the stroller, giving him the moment. The hardest part, he whispered, was realizing the woman I hurt most was the one who believed in me more than anyone else ever had. He rubbed the back of his neck. You saw me before the title, before the money, before the stress. You loved the man I was. And I let that man get lost. I traded time with you for meetings. I traded your safety for ego. I traded our marriage for a moment of weakness. Victoria's eyes softened, though she didn't interrupt. When I left the condo that night, he continued, voice cracking, I thought distance would be easier than facing the damage I caused. I convinced myself you'd be better without me, but that lie fell apart the moment I saw you at the courthouse, holding him. He swallowed hard enough that it broke the air between them. I think about that every night, the moment I realized what I could have lost forever. Not just you, not just Miles, but the chance to be the kind of man who deserves either of you. Silence wrapped around them, not heavy, but thick with things newly spoken. Victoria sat down beside him, leaving just enough space between them to be safe, but close enough that she didn't feel alone on the bench. I hear you, she said softly. I'm not promising anything, but I hear you. Christopher nodded, gratitude and grief all tangled in his expression. Thank you, he whispered, for saying that. Their walk continued toward the small park that led into a branch of the Atlanta Beltline. Runners passed by, families walked dogs, and the city hummed with life. The world felt normal for the first time in a long time. No courthouse tension, no papers to sign, no secrets between them. Two people trying, two hearts cautiously unlocking the parts they once closed off. The stroller bumped gently along the path. Christopher glanced at Victoria. Can I ask one more thing? She smiled faintly. We're being honest today. Ask. He hesitated, then said quietly, do you think we'll ever get back to being us? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she slowed, leaned over the stroller, and adjusted Miles's hat to shield his face from the sun. When she finally looked up, her eyes held clarity. Not coldness, not anger, just a truth she finally felt steady enough to say aloud. I don't want to go back, she murmured. His expression faltered. She stepped closer, not touching, but close enough that he felt the warmth of her presence. I want something better than what we were, she continued softly. If we rebuild, it has to be something new, something healthier, something honest. The tension in his shoulders eased slowly as her meaning settled. I can do that, he whispered. She nodded. We'll see. For now, I'm allowing space, that's all I can give today, and I'll honor it, he replied. Their eyes held a moment longer than necessary, gentle, vulnerable, unpretentious. And just like that, a small strand of affection returned. Not forced, real. By the time they returned to the townhouse, Miles was asleep, his tiny fists resting peacefully against his chest. Christopher helped carry the diaper bag inside. Victoria unbuckled Miles, lifting him with practiced ease while Christopher quietly set the stroller aside. As she laid the baby gently in the bassinet, she sensed Christopher lingering behind her, not intruding, not waiting for anything, simply standing close in quiet respect. She turned around. Today was good, she said softly. He smiled. It was. Thank you for letting me in, even a little. Victoria brushed a curl from her forehead. Small steps, he nodded. Small steps. When he left a few minutes later, Victoria stood at the door long after it closed, her hand pressed lightly to the wood. Forgiveness wasn't complete. Trust wasn't restored. But today, for the first time, she heard her own heart whisper something she never thought she'd feel again. Maybe healing is possible. Atlanta's sky darkened earlier than usual that evening, heavy with clouds that seemed to press low over the rooftops. By late afternoon, the wind picked up, scattering leaves across the sidewalk in hurried swirls. Inside Victoria's townhouse, the shift in the weather felt eerily synchronized with Miles's mood, restless, irritable, unable to settle for more than a few minutes. When Christopher arrived, he immediately sensed the tension in the air. You okay? He asked gently as Victoria opened the door. She gave a tired nod. Long day. He's been fussy since noon. Christopher stepped inside, shutting the door as the first rumble of thunder rolled across the neighborhood. Miles let out a loud cry from his position in Victoria's arms, his tiny face scrunching up with discomfort. Colic, Christopher guessed. Feels like it, she murmured, bouncing him lightly. I've tried everything. Warm bath, belly massage, pacing the floors. He's tired but won't stay asleep. Christopher moved closer, lowering his voice as though trying to soothe both of them. Let me help. You sit for a minute. Victoria hesitated, not because she didn't trust him, but because she was on the edge of unraveling. The lack of sleep from the night before had left her dizzy, and the storm outside only heightened the tension coiling in her body. Finally, she released a slow breath and handed Miles over. Okay, she whispered. Please. Christopher lifted Miles against his shoulder, patting his back softly. Hey, little man, what's going on tonight? You're fighting real hard, huh? Miles wailed louder in response, as if offended at the implication. Victoria collapsed onto the couch, pressing her fingertips to her temples. The pounding in her head matched the rhythm of the thunder outside. Did you eat today? Christopher asked without turning around. Half a sandwich, she muttered. He shook his head. Vic, she cut him off, voice thin. Don't start. I'm doing the best I can. I know, he said softly, but you can't pour from an empty cup. She stared at the floor. She hated how quickly her emotions snapped these days, hated feeling stretched so thin that even kindness felt heavy. Meanwhile, Miles continued crying, high-pitched, relentless. Christopher paced the living room, rubbing circles on Miles's back. The baby quieted only for a second before bursting into another intense cry. Thunder cracked sharply outside, startling all of them. Victoria jerked at the sound, her nerves shot. Can you close the curtains? She asked quietly. Christopher did, dimming the room to a softer glow from the side lamp. But Miles kept crying, and crying. And crying. Victoria clasped her hands tightly, trying to steady her breath. I don't know what else to do, she whispered, voice breaking. I've tried everything. He won't sleep. He won't settle. I feel like I'm failing him. Christopher turned immediately. Hey, don't say that. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees, hair falling around her face. Every mother online talks about routines and techniques and how they soothe their babies in minutes. Meanwhile, I'm here losing my mind because I can't get him calm for even 10. You are not failing, he said, moving closer. You're tired. You're stretched thin. That doesn't mean you're not a good mom. She didn't answer. Tears slipped down her cheeks silently. Miles's cries intensified, and it pushed something inside her past its limit. I can't, she choked, pressing her hands to her face. I can't listen to it anymore. I feel like my chest is closing. Christopher immediately placed Miles in the crook of his arm and knelt in front of her. Vic, look at me. She didn't. Please, he murmured. Slowly her gaze lifted, eyes red and shimmering. You're doing this alone most of the time, he said softly. You've handled every feeding, every night, every cry, but you don't have to shoulder this by yourself anymore. I'm here. A sob slipped out, raw and unfiltered. I'm so tired, Chris. I know, he whispered. Let me take over. For tonight, let me carry it. She shook her head weakly. It's not fair to put it all on you. It's not putting it on me, he corrected gently. It's sharing it, like parents are supposed to. Another thunderclap rattled the windows, and Miles jolted, screaming harder. Victoria crumbled. Her breath stuttered, shoulders shaking with exhaustion and frustration and helplessness she'd been holding inside for months. She hadn't allowed herself to break since becoming a mother, not fully. She had been strong, composed, determined even on the days she felt hollow. But tonight, the storm outside wasn't louder than the one inside her. Christopher didn't say another word. He shifted so he could hold Miles in one arm and reached out with the other, pulling Victoria gently into him. She resisted for half a second, then she fell apart. She sank against his chest, gripping his shirt tightly as sobs poured out, deep and unrestrained. Christopher wrapped his arm around her shoulders, holding her close while murmuring soft reassurances. It's okay. I'm here. You're not alone. I've got you. His voice was low, steady, a grounding force she desperately needed. Miles's cries softened slightly at the feeling of both parents close together, though he still whimpered intermittently. Victoria buried her face in Christopher's shoulder, letting go of a weight she had carried for far too long. She wasn't crying because of Miles alone. She was crying because of every lonely night during pregnancy, every fear, every heartbreak, every step she had taken alone while trying to piece herself back together. Christopher felt her shaking and tightened his hold. You're allowed to break, Vic. You're allowed to feel all of this. She clung harder. I didn't want you to see me like this. He placed a soft kiss on the top of her head, gentle, respectful, almost instinctual. I wish I had seen you sooner. I wish I had been there every time you felt this overwhelmed. Her breath stilled, not because of the kiss, but because of the sincerity woven through his voice. The storm cracked again, but inside the house something fragile and unspoken settled between them. When Victoria finally lifted her head, she wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I'm sorry. I couldn't hold it in. Don't apologize, he said immediately. This is what being a parent looks like. This is what being human looks like. She studied him, really studied him, through bleary eyes. His shirt was damp from her tears, his hair slightly out of place. Miles still fussed weakly against his chest, and yet he looked steady, devoted, present, a kind of presence she once begged for and never received. Something warm fluttered inside her, not romantic desire, not longing, just safety. Let me take him for a while, Christopher offered. You go shower, change clothes, breathe. Her voice broke again. You sure? I'm sure. She hesitated only a moment before nodding. Okay. When she left the room, Christopher whispered down to Miles. Hey, little guy, your mom's doing everything she can. We've got her, okay? We've got each other. The baby whimpered, then rested his cheek against Christopher's chest. 20 minutes later, Victoria returned wearing fresh pajamas, hair damp, eyes calmer. She paused in the hallway. Christopher was swaying gently side to side, singing something off-key but soft enough to settle the room. Miles was finally asleep in his arms, tiny fingers curled under his chin. Victoria's breath caught. That's the first time he slept all night without someone pacing non-stop, she whispered. Christopher smiled faintly. He got tired watching me struggle to remember the lyrics. A soft laugh escaped her, small but real. She stepped closer, brushing a curl from Miles's forehead. As her hand lingered near Christopher's, their fingers almost touched. Almost. Warmth sparked in the space between them. Not passion, not longing, but connection. Deep, gentle, human. "Chris," she whispered. "Thank you. For tonight. I mean that. I'm not going anywhere," he said quietly. Outside, the rain softened into a gentle drizzle, as if the storm had finally exhausted itself. Inside, something new had begun. A closeness. The first true moment where forgiveness didn't feel impossible. The townhouse had grown quiet after the storm. The rain had faded into a gentle sprinkle outside, tapping softly against the windows in a rhythmic way that made the whole room feel warmer than it had minutes earlier. Victoria stood on the threshold of the living room, watching Christopher sway lightly with their sleeping son. She hadn't meant to stare, but something about the sight, Christopher holding Miles with an ease he didn't have 2 weeks ago, grabbed her heart and held it still. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't perfect, it was simply real, and after months of carrying everything alone, real was enough to make her breath catch. Christopher noticed her and whispered, "He finally knocked out. Your son fights sleep like it's a sport. Gets it from your side," she whispered back. He laughed softly, careful not to wake the baby. "Probably." Victoria stepped closer, her steps quiet on the carpet. As she reached him, Christopher gently lowered Miles into the bassinet, pulling the small blanket over the baby's legs. For a moment, they both stood beside the bassinet, shoulder to shoulder, looking down at the little boy who had rewritten both their lives. "He looks peaceful now," Victoria whispered. Christopher nodded. "He always does after he gets everything out." "So do I," she murmured without thinking. Christopher turned, eyebrows lifting slightly. "You feel better?" Victoria didn't speak immediately. She took a slow breath, then another, as though figuring out the answer for herself. "Yes," she finally said, "I do." He gave a small nod, relief washing across his face. "Good." Victoria moved toward the couch, sinking into the cushions with a tired exhale. She expected Christopher to gather his things and prepare to leave for the night. He didn't. Instead, he walked over slowly and sat a respectful distance away, leaving space, but not distance. An unspoken signal that he wouldn't push past the boundary she set earlier. "You want some water?" he asked softly. She nodded. "Please." He stood, grabbed a glass from the kitchen, and returned, handing it to her carefully. She took a sip, letting the coolness steady her throat. Her eyes drifted briefly to the window, where lights from nearby houses cast faint reflections across the glass. "Tonight scared me," she admitted quietly. "Not just because of Miles's crying, but because I realized how close I was to breaking in a way I haven't in a long time." Christopher leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on his knees. "You've been holding too much by yourself. I didn't have a choice. You do now." She looked at him, really looked. He didn't flinch under her gaze. He didn't rush to defend himself. He didn't over-apologize. He simply waited, open and steady. "I don't know how to trust that yet," she whispered. "I'm not asking you to trust it. I'm asking you to watch it." Her chest tightened in a way that wasn't painful, just full. A moment passed, soft and fragile. She set the water on the coffee table and folded her hands in her lap. "Can we talk about something important, without it turning into a fight?" Christopher nodded slowly. "Of course." Victoria pulled one knee up onto the couch, turning slightly toward him. "Before all of this, before everything fell apart, what do you think went wrong between us?" He inhaled deeply, letting out a slow breath as he gathered his thoughts. "I stopped showing up for us. I let stress consume me. I let work take priority, thinking it made me a better husband when it actually made me a distant one." Victoria listened, her gaze steady. "You trusted me," he continued, "and I didn't honor that trust. I didn't communicate. I didn't protect what we had. I didn't protect you." His voice wavered, but he didn't pull away from the vulnerability. "I thought you were strong enough to handle everything," he said quietly. "I didn't realize strength doesn't mean someone should stand alone." Victoria swallowed. Her voice came out softer than she intended. "I felt invisible, Chris, like I was standing in a room with you, but you couldn't see me anymore." His eyes closed. "I see you now," he whispered. "Every part of you." She didn't respond immediately. She didn't know how. Hearing him say it aloud after months of silence and heartbreak stirred something deep in her chest, something she had locked away to survive. "But this," she said, gesturing softly between them, "is slow. It has to stay slow. I know, and we're not going back to what we were." "We're not," he agreed. "We're building something new." Their eyes lingered, and for the first time in a long time neither looked away. A small knock of thunder echoed far in the distance, muted by the storm's retreat. The sound didn't startle either of them. Instead, It felt like a reminder of how intense the night had been, and how different it felt now. Victoria's voice lowered. You holding me like that tonight. It felt like the first time I wasn't carrying everything alone. You weren't, he murmured, and that scares me, she admitted. Christopher leaned back slightly, giving her space. Then we go at your pace. Always. Silence settled again, soft, not strained. Victoria's hand rested lightly on the throw blanket between them. Christopher's fingers brushed the same fabric without meaning to, not touching her hand, but close enough for her to feel the heat of it. Her breath hitched. A subtle shift. A gentle pull. Her heart whispered something she wasn't ready to say aloud but couldn't deny either. She turned her palm slightly, letting her fingers graze the edge of his. Barely, light as air. Christopher froze, not in fear but in caution, giving her complete control over what happened next. Victoria's voice was quiet. Tonight, I needed you. His answer came just as soft. I'm here. Every time you need me, I'm here. Her eyes lifted to his, tired, wounded, hopeful, a mixture that felt human and honest. Christopher's gaze dropped to her lips, then flicked back up to her eyes immediately, seeking permission, not taking it. She leaned in first. It was small, hesitant, a brush more than a kiss at first. Their lips barely met, a gentle tremble passing between them. Christopher held still, letting her lead, letting her set the tone, letting her have full control. When she kissed him a second time, slightly firmer, steadier, he responded with equal softness. No rush, no pressure, just warmth, just sincerity. Just two people rediscovering a connection they thought was lost. When they finally parted, her forehead stayed against his for one lingering second. We're not fixed, she whispered. I know. This doesn't make everything okay. It doesn't have to, he said softly. It just means there's something left worth fighting for. She exhaled shakily, then pulled back, brushing a loose curl from her face. A chance, Chris. That's what I'm giving you. A chance, not a guarantee. Christopher nodded, and the depth of gratitude in his expression nearly unraveled her again. I won't take it lightly. A promise. Victoria leaned back into the couch, her heart calmer than it had been in months. Miles stirred softly in his sleep. The storm outside cleared completely, and inside the small Atlanta townhouse, two people who once lost everything took their first step towards something new. Not perfect, not certain, but real. The morning after the storm felt strangely peaceful in a way that almost startled Victoria. She expected to wake up with the same heaviness she carried for months, the tightness in her chest, the constant bracing for the next hard moment. But instead, she woke to something quiet, something close to calm. Miles had slept better than usual, only stirring once around dawn. When Victoria lifted him from the bassinet, she kissed his warm cheek and whispered, "Thank you for letting Mommy rest." She wasn't prepared for how good that rest would feel. Downstairs, she made herself tea, the warm steam brushing her face. The living room carried faint reminders of last night. Christopher's jacket draped over a chair, the soft scent of baby lotion in the air, and the emotional residue of a night that changed something in her. Not everything, but something. A gentle knock sounded at the door, right on time, again. She opened it to find Christopher standing beneath the soft early light holding a paper bag with breakfast from the cafe near Piedmont Park. "Morning," he said softly. Her lips lifted just slightly. "Morning." He stepped inside, setting the bag on the counter. "I brought muffins, and fruit, and something for Miles." Raised an eyebrow. "For a baby who still thinks his toes are snacks?" He laughed under his breath. "It's just a soft rattle toy. I thought it might help soothe him on fussy days." Victoria paused. Thoughtful Christopher felt new, not unfamiliar but renewed, like something he had buried inside himself had been uncovered again. She took the toy gently. "Thank you." He nodded, glancing around the room before asking, "How are you feeling today?" She hesitated only a moment. "Better. Much better." He let out a breath, relief, not pressure. "Good. I'm glad." Miles fussed from the playmat, and Christopher immediately walked over, crouching beside him. "Good morning, buddy," he murmured. "Did you give your mom a break?" Miles reached up, grabbing a handful of Christopher's shirt. Christopher laughed softly and lifted him into his arms. Victoria watched the way her son lit up instantly, the way his tiny hands clung to Christopher's collar like he never doubted him for a second. Co-parenting had begun as something awkward and new and frightening for both of them. But now it was beginning to feel easy, natural, almost rhythmic. She joined them on the floor, crossing her legs as Miles babbled in Christopher's lap. "There he goes again," she smiled, just talking to hear himself. Christopher traced a gentle hand along Miles's cheek. "He's trying to say something," Victoria laughed. If he says anything other than milk, I'll be shocked. But Christopher shook his head. No, listen. He keeps repeating the same sound. Miles squealed, kicking his legs. Ba, ba, ba. Victoria raised both eyebrows. That's new. Christopher grinned. He's practicing consonants. He's getting close to words. Miles laughed again, louder this time. Ba, ba. Victoria clapped her hands together. Look at you, genius boy. Christopher's smile softened. You think he'll say your name first? Obviously, she smirked. I'm the one who feeds him at 2 a.m. I don't know, Christopher teased. He seems to like saying ba. Maybe he's working on da. Victoria shot him a look. Don't you dare claim that before it happens. He chuckled, but his eyes never left his son. There was a tenderness there that went beyond guilt or obligation. It was devotion, real devotion. As Miles wiggled happily between them, Victoria felt something inside her shift again. Watching them together like this, peaceful, playful, grounded, reminded her of the early days of their marriage, the ones before stress, before arguments, before she felt herself fading into the background of their relationship. Christopher had laughed like this once, held her like this once, loved her like this once. Maybe he still did. She quickly shook off the thought, too soon, too fragile, when Miles suddenly clapped his hands and squealed. Da! Both adults froze. Victoria's mouth fell open. Did he? Christopher's eyes widened. Say it again, buddy. Come on. Miles giggled, then said it again, louder this time. Da! Victoria covered her mouth as Christopher lifted Miles up, spinning him in a small, happy circle. That's my boy, he said, voice warm and thick with emotion. You said my name. Victoria felt her eyes sting unexpectedly. This wasn't like watching a video online of a random baby talking. This was her son, her miracle, speaking his first clear word. And it wasn't directed at her. But instead of disappointment, something else rushed through her. Gratitude. Because for months Miles had no one to say that to. Now he did, and he chose it all on his own. Christopher sat back on the floor, visibly overwhelmed. Wow, I didn't think he'd say it this early. Victoria swallowed the lump in her throat. He sees how hard you're trying. Babies know. They always know. Christopher looked at her, really looked. Thank you for letting me be here for this. She held his gaze, something tender flickering across her features. Thank you for earning it. Later that afternoon, they took Miles for a walk around Midtown to celebrate the milestone. The sun warmed the sidewalks, and the energy of the city buzzed softly around them. They strolled past local shops, small cafes, and families enjoying the weather. Co-parenting wasn't just functional now. It was fluid, easy, almost like muscle memory returning after years of disuse. At a crosswalk, Christopher pushed the stroller while Victoria adjusted Miles's hat. Their hands brushed lightly, not accidental, not forced, just natural. Her heartbeat ticked up, not racing, just aware. As they approached a bench near Piedmont Park, Christopher broke the quiet. I've been thinking a lot, he said. That sounds dangerous, she teased lightly, though her pulse quickened. He smiled faintly. No, really. I've been thinking about the future. Victoria slowed, turning toward him. In what way? He hesitated, careful, measured, respectful of her pace. In the way that makes me look at you and realize I want to do things right this time, he said softly. All the way right. Victoria's breath caught. Christopher, he lifted a hand, not touching her, but asking for a sliver of space to speak. I'm not saying anything needs to happen now. I'm not rushing. I'm not assuming. But when I look at you with him, when I look at us, I can't help thinking about what rebuilding, a future together might look like. Her stomach tightened. Not out of fear, but out of the weight of something she hadn't allowed herself to imagine. He continued gently. If you ever wanted to, someday, I'd want to ask you properly, not like last time, not rushed, not distracted, not half the man I should have been. Victoria swallowed. His sincerity felt heavy but warm, grounding but soft. Chris, she whispered, I'm not ready for that. I know, he said immediately. I'm not asking for an answer. I'm just letting you know where my heart is, where it's been moving. She nodded slowly. Thank you for being honest. And thank you, he said quietly, for giving us a chance to try again. They stood there for a moment, the breeze brushing past them, the hum of city life around them but not between them. Victoria finally exhaled. Let's focus on today, on Miles, on what we're building right now. Christopher smiled. Today sounds perfect, and as they continued their walk, shoulders close, steps aligned, it became clear that something fundamental had shifted between them. Victoria's heart wasn't all the way open. Not yet, but it was warming, slowly and steadily, toward a kind of love that wasn't recycled or nostalgic, one she could trust if given enough time. Miles babbled happily from his stroller, kicking his feet, saying his new favorite word on repeat, da, 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 and neither Victoria nor Christopher could stop smiling. The idea began quietly, more a whisper of logic than a leap of romance. After Miles said his first word and their afternoon stroll through Midtown ended in gentle laughter, Christopher found himself reconsidering every choice he made before their separation. What mattered? What didn't? What was he still holding on to? And why? These thoughts followed him back to the penthouse that night. The elevator opened to the top floor, revealing the pristine space he once considered a symbol of success. Floor-to-ceiling windows, sharp angles, sleek decor, a panoramic view of Atlanta glittering beneath the night sky. But as he stepped inside, the silence hit him first. It had always felt luxurious. Tonight it felt hollow. He removed his jacket, draping it over the couch, and stared at the home he once believed represented stability. Yet no memory here was warm, no laughter, no shared meals, no tiny socks on the floor, no baby coos, no Victoria curled under a blanket. Nothing that mattered lived in this penthouse. He exhaled. Then he pulled out his phone. 2 days later, Victoria was in the kitchen preparing lunch when she heard a knock. She wiped her hands on a towel and opened the door, finding Christopher holding a thick set of keys. "What's this?" she asked. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "A decision I should have made months ago." She raised a brow. "That sounds dramatic." He laughed softly. "Maybe a little, but I mean it." He handed her the keys. She didn't take them at first. "Christopher, explain." "I rented out the penthouse." Victoria blinked. "You did what?" "I rented it out," he repeated calmly. "It's too far, too empty. It doesn't make sense for me to live across the city when our son and you are here." Victoria's fingers tightened around the towel in her hand. "Where will you stay now?" "I found a townhouse 10 minutes from you," he said. "Walking distance if I cut through the park." "You moved?" He shook his head gently. "No, I will move this weekend. I signed the lease this morning." She stared at him, conflicted, surprised, humbled. "Chris, that's a big change." "It's a necessary change," he corrected. "I want to be part of Miles's daily life, not a visitor who shows up after driving across town." Her voice softened. "And me? Am I part of that decision?" His eyes held hers with quiet certainty, a huge part. Heat rose to her cheeks, not embarrassment, not pressure. Something else, something warm. "Can I see the place?" she asked. His lips curved slightly. "I was hoping you'd say that." They walked together later that afternoon, pushing Miles in his stroller as they followed a sidewalk lined with trees. The sun filtered through branches, giving the path a soft glow. When they reached the townhouse complex, Victoria felt her breath ease. It wasn't extravagant. It wasn't sterile. It felt lived in, human, real. Inside, the layout reminded her of her own home, but slightly larger. Open living room, kitchen to the left, a hallway leading to bedrooms. "This is where you'll stay?" she asked. "If you think it's a good choice," he said carefully. She turned to him. "It's not my decision." "Vic," he said gently, "every choice I make now affects both of you. I want your opinion. It matters." Something fluttered in her chest. She walked deeper inside, running a hand over the counters, checking the lighting, imagining Miles crawling along the floor someday. "It's nice," she said honestly. Christopher exhaled in relief. "Good. I want it to feel like a safe place. For him, and for you too, if you ever visit." She froze at the phrasing. "If you ever visit. Not when not you should not this is ours. Just an open door, not a push." She nodded softly. "It does feel safe." They moved through the hallway when Miles fussed from the stroller. Victoria lifted him gently, rocking him. "He's probably hungry," she murmured. Christopher reached out. "Here, let me help. You sit." Victoria hesitated, but passed the bottle from the diaper bag. Christopher held Miles close as he fed him, swaying gently. She watched them, man and child fitting together in a way that felt undeniably right, and the thought crossed her mind, uninvited but impossible to ignore. This is what it would have looked like if things had never broken. But they had broken, and that truth lived between them, silent but present. Still, something else was being rebuilt, slow and steady. The next week was filled with movement, literal and emotional. Christopher made trips back and forth, transferring boxes, donating things he no longer needed, cleaning out the penthouse until it no longer felt like a home but a shell. Victoria helped him on the second day, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She folded blankets, labeled containers, and held Miles while Christopher packed the last of his clothing. At one point, she found an old photo in a drawer, her and Christopher on their first anniversary, smiling on the beltline, frozen in a moment before everything fell apart. She didn't show it to him, but she didn't throw it away either. Instead, she placed it gently into a box labeled Keep. By Friday, the new townhouse was filled with boxes and half-assembled furniture. Chris, Victoria said, staring at a lopsided shelf he claimed he had expertly handled. This is leaning like it's scared to stand straight. He ran a hand through his hair. Okay, so maybe I skipped a step. She pointed at the instructions. Maybe read this step right here that literally says required. He rolled his eyes playfully. Look at you being handy, she smirked. Look at you pretending to be. They both laughed, genuine laughter that bounced off the new walls and made the space feel less like his and more like theirs. But harmony never lasts without interruption. Later that afternoon, they disagreed for the first time since reconnecting. It began with something small, where to place the baby gate. Christopher wanted it near the kitchen, Victoria wanted it by the stairs. It's more dangerous by the stairs, she insisted. But he crawls near the kitchen more often, Christopher countered. Victoria crossed her arms. I think I know my son's habits. Christopher froze. There it was, the place where old wounds lived. He exhaled slowly. Vic, I'm trying to help. I wasn't questioning your parenting. She sighed, rubbing her forehead. I know, this is new. Sharing all of this. He stepped closer, voice soft. It is new. And it's okay for it to feel strange. She nodded, looking away. I'm sorry. I'm not upset, he said gently. We'll figure things out together. The word landed softly, settling the moment. They reevaluated the baby gate placement and compromised, one near the kitchen, one near the stairs. They worked side by side, hands brushing occasionally, tension melting slowly. By evening, the townhouse looked less chaotic. Miles sat in the middle of the living room on a blanket, clapping happily as his parents circled around him, cleaning up the last bits of clutter. Christopher glanced at Victoria, watching her tuck a curl behind her ear as she laughed at something Miles did. He didn't say it aloud, but the thought echoed clearly inside him. This feels like home. As the sun set, Victoria picked up Miles to head back to her place. Christopher walked her to the door. Today was good, he said quietly. It was, she agreed. He hesitated, then added, Thank you for helping me move. For real, she smiled gently. Thank you for moving closer. Their eyes lingered, not filled with the uncertainty of weeks before, but something steadier. Warm, growing, intentional. When she stepped into the night air, Miles bundled against her chest, she realized she wasn't walking away from Christopher. They were walking towards something, slowly, carefully, but together. The first evening in Christopher's new townhouse had a different energy than any moment they had shared since reconnecting. Not tense, not uncertain, not fragile, warm. After the baby gates were secured and the furniture rearranged to make the space safer for Miles, Victoria stayed for dinner, something neither of them had planned, yet neither wanted to end. Christopher had made a simple meal, more out of determination than skill, pasta, salad, and garlic bread that leaned dangerously close to overdone. Victoria tasted a bite and grinned. You're getting better. Christopher shot her a look. Are you saying my cooking used to be bad? She held up her fingers, almost touching. Just a little. He groaned. Wow, brutal honesty. But laughter filled the kitchen, a soft shared melody that made the townhouse feel more lived in than it had all day. Miles babbled from his high chair, slapping his hands happily on the tray. See? Christopher said, pointing. He likes it. Victoria leaned down to wipe the baby's mouth. He likes his sock, too. That doesn't mean it's tasty. Ruthless, Christopher said, pretending to be offended. Absolutely ruthless. Victoria's laughter faded into a smile, one of those soft ones that didn't need permission. Christopher caught it, held it, returned it with one of his own. Something shifted, something quiet but unmistakable. After dinner, they settled into the living room. Miles played on his blanket, chewing on the rattle toy Christopher had bought him. The townhouse was filled with a comfort none of them anticipated, like pieces of a puzzle finding their rightful places. Victoria sat on the couch, pulling her legs beneath her, watching Christopher stack a set of foam blocks with Miles. Hey, she said softly. Christopher glanced up. Yeah, you're good at this. At stacking blocks? At parenting, she corrected. He looked down at his hands for a moment, then met her eyes again. I'm trying. You're doing more than trying, she said gently. You're showing up. Every day. Consistently. I noticed that. He swallowed, not trusting his voice at first. Thank you. Her gaze drifted to Miles, who squealed as Christopher made exaggerated sound effects with the blocks. The scene was simple, ordinary, even. But ordinary was something she had feared she'd never get again, not with him, not as a family. The simplicity made her chest ache in the best way. A little later, Miles began rubbing his eyes, a sign the day was catching up with him. Victoria scooped him up, swaying gently. Christopher stood. "Here, let me set up the pack and play." He hurried upstairs and returned with it, setting it up in a corner of the living room. Victoria laid Miles down, humming softly as she tucked him in. He fell asleep quickly, his tiny breath steady and peaceful. Victoria stepped back, folding her arms loosely around herself. "He looks safe here." Christopher stood beside her, voice low. "That's the goal." Their shoulders brushed, just barely. Not intentional, not accidental, just natural. Victoria didn't pull away, neither did he. With Miles asleep, the silence between them grew softer, charged but not heavy. Christopher motioned toward the couch. "Sit with me for a bit?" Victoria hesitated, then nodded. They sat with a comfortable amount of space between them, though neither pretended not to feel the closeness. "It's strange," she murmured. "What is?" "Feeling comfortable. With you. Here." He turned toward her. "Strange good or strange bad?" She considered the question thoughtfully. "Strange. Healing." His breath caught slightly. "That's the best kind of strange." She smiled faintly. He shifted, resting his arm on the back of the couch, not touching her, but creating a space she could lean into if she chose. He didn't guide her, didn't coax her, didn't press. He simply made room. It was the simplest thing, the quietest gesture, but it was everything she needed. Without thinking too hard, Victoria relaxed back into the cushion, her shoulder brushing his arm. His breath stilled for a moment, but he didn't move. "How do you feel?" she asked softly. He let out a breath. "Grateful. For what? For this. For you letting me in a little more every day." She tilted her head, studying him, not the polished CEO he once projected, but the man underneath. The man who laughed while building leaning shelves and burned garlic bread and fed their son until his arms got tired. "Chris," she said gently, "love doesn't fix everything." He nodded. "I know, but healing, it looks different every day. I know that too." She took a slow breath. "And this, whatever this is, I'm not ready to name it yet." "I don't need a name," he said softly. "Just your honesty." Her throat tightened. "And your pace," he added. "Always your pace." That landed somewhere deep, inside her, somewhere that had been closed off for a long time. A few minutes later she shifted closer, her knee brushing his. He stilled, letting her guide the closeness. Her voice lowered. "Do you ever think about us? Who we could be now? Not who we were." "All the time," he answered. "And," she whispered, "and I think we could build something better than what we had. Something intentional. Something we choose every day. Not something we fall into." Victoria's eyes softened. "Intentional. It's the word I wish I understood years ago." She lowered her gaze, her voice fragile. "I was afraid you'd want the old version of us." "I don't," he said immediately. "That version hurt you. I want the version we're creating now. Slow, steady, real." Her breath trembled. "And Miles," he continued quietly, "he's part of that. He's the reason I'll never take you for granted again." Victoria's lips parted slightly, not in surprise, but in recognition of the truth she felt but hadn't said aloud. Their son wasn't just the bond between them. He was the proof that love, even broken, could become whole again. She leaned into Christopher, softly, naturally, as though her body made the choice before her mind did. His arm lowered gently around her shoulders, offering warmth without pressure. They stayed like that, close but unhurried. "Can I ask you something?" she whispered. "Anything. What do you want this to look like? Long term?" He didn't answer right away, not because he didn't know, but because he wanted to choose his words carefully. "I want a home," he said. "Not a house. A home with you and Miles." Her heartbeat stilled. "I want mornings," he continued. "Cereal on the counter. You teasing me about my terrible coffee. Miles laughing at us for no reason." She exhaled a shaky breath. "And evenings," he added. "Helping with homework someday, cooking dinner together, putting him to bed, arguing and making up, living life side by side instead of apart." Victoria blinked back sudden tears, not of sadness, but of possibility. "And if that can't happen," he said softly, "I'll still be here, as a father, as someone who cares about your happiness more than anything." She turned toward him fully now, her hand resting lightly on his chest. "Chris, you're not the same man I left. I'm trying very hard not to be, and I'm not the same woman you hurt," she said quietly. "I'm stronger now. I choose myself first." He swallowed. "Good. You should." She nodded, her thumb brushing lightly along the fabric of his shirt. But choosing myself doesn't mean I can't choose you too. Eventually, something bloomed in his expression, hope steady and grounded. Not desperate, not hurried, just real. She leaned up slightly, brushing her lips softly against his cheek, a gesture tender and intentional. We're building something new, she whispered. He closed his eyes. And I'm with you. Every step. Their foreheads touched lightly, not a kiss, but something just as intimate, something that spoke of careful beginnings and shared futures. Miles stirred softly in his sleep, letting out a small sigh. Victoria and Christopher both looked at him, then back at each other. We're doing this, she whispered. Yeah, Christopher said softly. We really are. And in that quiet living room, with their son sleeping peacefully nearby, a new kind of love took its place. One built on choice, on intention, on healing. Slow, steady, and beautifully real. Real love isn't measured by perfection. It's measured by effort, by showing up even when it's hard. If you've ever rebuilt something fragile, or learned to love again after hurt, share your story in the comments. You never know who your courage might help today. Saturday mornings in Atlanta had a way of feeling like a soft reset, and this one was no different. The sky above Piedmont Park stretched wide and clean, brushing a faint blue glow over the tops of the magnolia trees at the botanical garden. Christopher suggested they spend the morning there with Miles. Fresh air does wonders for babies, he'd said. But Victoria knew better. He wanted something else, something bigger, though he tried to hide it behind casual smiles and an extra diaper bag packed with unnecessary items. Still, she didn't ask. She simply agreed. Their life had reached a point where peace wasn't something they tiptoed around. It was something they shared. They arrived early, just as the dew began to lift from the grass. Miles, now toddling more than crawling, squealed when his feet touched the ground. He stretched his arms up toward the nearest patch of sunlight, babbling in a string of joyful sounds that made Victoria laugh. Christopher watched them both with quiet admiration. He's getting so big, he murmured, slipping his hands into his pockets. He's growing fast, she replied, brushing a curl from the baby's forehead as Miles clung to her leg. Too fast sometimes. I can barely keep up. Christopher knelt beside their son, adjusting his tiny jacket. I want to be here for all of it, he said softly. Victoria caught his tone, steady, intentional. It wasn't the voice of a man trying to repair an image. It was the voice of someone who had been humbled, transformed, and rebuilt from the inside out. They walked further into the garden, past the winding stone paths, until the magnolia lawn opened before them. Large white blooms hung overhead, petals glistening in the gentle morning light. Victoria paused, letting the beauty of it settle over her. She hadn't been here since before everything fell apart. The memory was faint. She remembered walking through this very lawn holding Christopher's hand years ago, dreaming of a future they hadn't yet realized. Now, standing in nearly the same place, she felt a different kind of future hovering around her. One that wasn't naive or idealized, one shaped by trials and heartbreak and triumphs she never expected to have. Christopher spread out a blanket beneath the largest tree. Miles crawled onto it eagerly, plopping onto his stomach and smacking his hands against the fabric as if announcing he approved. The three of them settled, there, eating light snacks and taking pictures of Miles poking at the grass. It felt natural, as if the world itself had realigned to allow this moment, a family sitting together in quiet harmony. At one point, Victoria leaned back to stretch. Christopher was watching her, an unreadable expression in his eyes. What? She asked with a small smile. You look peaceful, he said. So do you. He exhaled, brushing his thumb along his knee. I haven't been able to stop thinking lately, about how far we've come, about how much I almost lost. Victoria's heart fluttered, not from romantic excitement, but from the meaning behind his words. He was not a man rehearsing a speech. He was a man speaking from the center of his chest. I'm grateful every day that you let me back in, he continued, voice subdued. You could have closed the door forever, and I would have deserved it. Victoria lowered her gaze. I didn't let you back in easily. I know, he said gently, and I'm glad you didn't. I needed to earn my place again. He shifted to sit closer, leaving enough space that she didn't feel pressured, but close enough that she could sense the sincerity radiating from him. Vic, he murmured, can I show you something? She looked up, curious. What is it? Christopher reached beside the blanket and pulled out a small velvet box. Victoria's breath caught instantly, not because she didn't expect a future with him, but because she never imagined he would revisit this moment with such tenderness after everything that had broken them. He didn't open the box yet. Instead, he turned to Miles first. Their son sat wedged between them, playing with a blade of grass. Christopher touched his little hand gently. Buddy, he whispered, you're the reason I grew up. You helped me understand what it means to love without conditions. Thank you. Then he turned to Victoria. And then, slowly, he lowered himself to one knee. Not the frantic, emotional kneel of a man trying to fix a disaster. Not the charming, breezy kneel of a young executive proposing from a place of ego. This kneel was steady, thoughtful, honest. Victoria felt her chest tighten. "Victoria," he began, voice thick, "the first time I asked you to marry me, I loved you, but I didn't understand what love required. I didn't understand how to show it. I didn't understand how to fight for it." Her eyes stung with tears, but she held his gaze. "I hurt you," he said, deeply, "and I'll never stop owning that. But every day since the moment you brought Miles into my arms, I've been working, truly working, to become a man worthy of our family. Not because I want to erase the past, but because I want to move forward with honesty and intention." He opened the velvet box. Inside was the same ring, polished, restored, glimmering with new light despite being an old symbol. "I don't want the life we had before," he said softly. "I want the life we're building now, a real partnership, a real home, a real chance to love each other in the way we both needed all along. Victoria, will you marry me? Again, on your terms, at your pace, for the right reasons this time?" A tear slid down her cheek, then another. Miles crawled onto her lap, giggling as though completely unaware of the magnitude of what was unfolding. Victoria cupped their son's head gently, then looked back at Christopher. Her voice wavered. "The night you walked out of our condo, I thought my entire world ended. I cried until I couldn't breathe. I held on to pain like it was all I had left." Christopher's expression twisted with regret, but he didn't interrupt. "I didn't think I'd ever trust you again," she continued. "But you showed up. Every day. Not with promises, just with actions. And slowly, I began to see the man I knew you could be." She took a shaky breath. "And the truth is, I love you, still. But differently now, stronger, wiser, with boundaries, with clarity." The tears fell freely now. "So yes," she whispered, "I'll marry you. Not because we're going back, but because we're stepping forward. Together." Christopher's exhale was almost a sob. He slipped the ring onto her finger with trembling hands, then kissed her knuckles with reverence. Miles clapped, though it was unclear whether he understood any part of what was happening. It didn't matter. His joy filled the space like sunlight. Christopher rose and gathered Victoria into his arms, not in a sweeping, dramatic embrace, but a simple, grounding one, the kind that said, "We made it. Against every odd, we made it." Victoria rested her forehead against his. This time she whispered, "We're doing it right." He nodded, brushing his thumb across her cheek. "This time, I won't lose sight of what matters." Around them, the magnolia blooms swayed gently in the morning breeze, as if blessing their second chance. And for the first time since their marriage had shattered, Victoria felt whole, completely, beautifully whole. The Monday morning air carried a softness that felt almost symbolic, as if Atlanta itself understood the significance of the day. The sun sat gentle in the sky, warming the courthouse steps without blinding them. Victoria held Miles on her hip as she ascended, her other hand loosely linked with Christopher's. It wasn't a rushed grip or a nervous one. It was steady, shared, earned. The ring he'd placed on her finger under the magnolia tree glimmered each time the light caught it, and every gleam served as a quiet reminder they were walking towards something brand new, even if the building they were entering had once been the site of their brokenness. Christopher opened the courthouse door for her. "After you," he murmured, his voice soft enough to feel intimate yet clear enough to express respect. It wasn't the tone of a man who assumed her presence. It was the tone of a man who cherished it. Inside, the smell of paper, old wood, and floor polish greeted them. The corridor was busy but not crowded. People moving with purpose, some smiling, some tense, all carrying stories that had brought them to this same hallway. Victoria looked down at Miles, who stared around with wide eyes, his tiny fingers curled around the strap of her dress. "You okay?" Christopher whispered. "I am," she answered, surprising herself with how true it felt. "Better than I expected." The clerk behind the window recognized them, or at least recognized the last name. "Mr. Harper," she said, glancing at the paperwork. "Back again?" Christopher nodded with a warm smile. "Yes, ma'am, but this time we're here to begin something, not end it." Victoria felt her chest flutter. The clerk's face softened. She had seen hundreds of couples, thousands even, but something about this one made her pause long enough to offer a genuine smile. "Well," she said, stamping the forms, "then let's make sure today marks the start of something beautiful for the three of you." They stepped aside to wait, finding a wooden bench along the wall. Christopher sat first, then patted the seat beside him. Victoria lowered herself gently, adjusting Miles, who had begun patting his father's knee as if summoning attention. "Hey, little man," Christopher whispered, leaning close. "You ready to be the world's cutest ring bearer?" Miles responded with laughter. Loud, delighted laughter that made several people turn their heads with smiles. Victoria giggled softly. "I think that's a yes." Christopher's gaze drifted to her face, lingering there with admiration he didn't bother hiding. "You look incredible, Vic." She brushed a curl from her shoulder. "It's just a simple dress." "No," he said, shaking his head lightly. "You look like peace, like someone who fought to stand tall again. And I'm honored I get to stand beside you." Her throat tightened, but before she could respond, a deputy opened the door at the end of the hall. "Harper party?" Victoria inhaled slowly. Christopher stood and reached for her free hand, not pulling, not urging, simply offering. She accepted, rising with Miles held securely against her. They entered the small ceremonial room. It wasn't extravagant, but it was warm. Cream-colored walls, a polished desk, 2 flags, and a judge with kind eyes who wore a smile that reached the corners of his face. "Good morning," the judge greeted them. "A wedding today?" Christopher nodded. "Yes, sir." The judge glanced at Miles, who was wiggling happily in Victoria's arms. "And I see we have a very important guest." Victoria laughed softly. "He's our ring bearer." "Well," the judge chuckled, "he's already doing a fine job just being here." Christopher and Victoria stood before the desk. A small wooden box rested on the surface, holding the rings they'd brought, one old, one new. Victoria's ring was the same as before, symbolic of what had survived. Christopher's ring was new, a representation of the man he had become. "Are you two ready?" the judge asked. They exchanged a glance, one filled with knowing, with history, with choices made and forgiven. "Yes," Christopher said first. "Yes," Victoria echoed. The judge folded his hands. Marriage is not only a commitment between 2 partners, it is a daily decision to listen, to grow, to communicate, to show grace, and to learn from what came before. Today you are not simply renewing something, you are choosing each other with new eyes and a new understanding of what love requires. Victoria swallowed hard. Her fingers curled tighter around Christopher's. "Christopher," the judge continued, "do you take Victoria as your wife, choosing partnership built on respect, honesty, patience, and accountability, not only for the good days, but especially for the challenging ones?" Christopher turned fully toward her, his face steady. "I do," he said, "with all of me, every day." "And Victoria," the judge said, "do you take Christopher as your husband, choosing to walk forward together not because the road is smooth, but because you both value what is worth rebuilding?" She looked into his eyes she once feared she'd never look into with love again. "I do," she whispered, "because choosing each other this time means choosing growth, choosing family, choosing hope." The judge nodded slowly, deeply. "Then let's seal it properly. Rings, please." Victoria placed Miles on her hip and opened the small wooden box. Miles reached inside, picking up Christopher's ring with a triumphant squeal as if he understood he was participating in history. Christopher laughed. "Good job, buddy." Victoria slipped the ring from her son's grip and handed it to Christopher. He held it for a moment, breathing out. "Second chances mean everything to me," he murmured, just loud enough for her to hear. "Thank you for giving me one." He slid the ring onto her finger. She reached for the second ring, then took Christopher's hand. "This time, we move forward with clarity," she whispered. With truth, she pushed the ring onto his finger. He exhaled as if the gesture unlocked something in him. The judge smiled wide. "Well, it is my honor to pronounce you husband and wife once again." A wave of emotion rolled through the room, gentle, powerful, warm. "You may share your first kiss as a remarried couple." Christopher stepped forward slightly, offering Victoria the chance to close the distance. She leaned in, resting her hand on his cheek, and kissed him softly. Nothing theatrical, nothing overly dramatic. Just a quiet promise exchanged between 2 people who knew what it meant to lose everything and rebuild from the ground up. When they pulled away, Miles clapped and giggled, delighted by the sound of their laughter. The judge signed the papers. "Congratulations, Harper family. Truly." As they walked out of the courtroom, Christopher swung the door open with one hand while supporting Victoria's back with the other. Miles rested against her shoulder, his eyes already drooping from the excitement. On the courthouse steps, Christopher paused. "Vic," he said, voice low, "thank you for trusting me with your heart a second time." She touched his chest lightly. "Just don't forget what it took for us to get here." "I won't," he promised, "not for a single day." They stood together, the Atlanta breeze wrapping around them, their son nestled happily between them, and for the first time in a long time, the future felt steady. Not perfect, not easy, but steady, rooted in something real, something learned, something chosen, a family once again. Evening settled over Atlanta with a soft glow, turning the city's skyline into a patchwork of warm lights and calm shadows. Their courthouse ceremony had been simple, short, and beautiful. But the weight of everything they had survived, heartbreak, distance, hard conversations, rebuilding, deserved a moment that felt just as meaningful. So Christopher suggested they stop by their old condo rooftop, the place where they once shared late-night talks, laughter, and dreams that eventually collapsed. It was the one place he avoided for months because every brick felt like a reminder of what he threw away. Yet tonight, stepping onto the rooftop with Victoria's hand in his and Miles resting against his chest, the place didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt reclaimed. Victoria stood at the edge for a moment, looking out at the city stretching beneath them. The lights resembled 1,000 little chances, each one illuminating a path they could choose now that their hearts had found their way back to each other. Christopher set Miles down near the lounge seats, where the toddler discovered a plastic cup someone had left behind. He immediately tapped it against the cushion, babbling happily. "Looks like someone's ready to start his own band," Christopher joked. Victoria laughed softly, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "He's definitely going to have rhythm. Might get that from you." "Please," he teased. "You've seen me dance, and I still married you again," she said, nudging him gently. They shared a smile, familiar yet renewed. A smile that had survived storms. A small speaker sat near the balcony wall, one they used to play music from during lazy Sunday evenings. Christopher walked over, dusted it off, and turned it on. He scrolled through old playlists until one caught his eye, a list titled Us, Before We Forgot Who We Were. Victoria felt a pinch in her heart seeing it again. They made that playlist during the early years, when everything still felt effortless. A soft crackle came from the speaker, followed by the unmistakable voice of Sam Cooke drifting into the air. The opening of Nothing Can Change This Love filled the rooftop with its warm, soulful sound. Victoria froze. "Christopher, this song..." He turned toward her slowly. "I know. It was the first slow dance we ever had. In our living room. You were wearing that oversized sweater and fuzzy socks. You said it felt embarrassing. And you said I looked perfect," she replied, smiling at the memory. "I meant it then," he said, walking closer. "And I mean it now." He extended his hand. A simple gesture, yet weighted with sincerity. Victoria looked at his hand, then at his face, the man who once walked away, the man who came back, the man who rebuilt brick by brick what he had shattered. She took his hand, not because the moment demanded it, but because her heart chose it. Christopher pulled her close, gentle, tentative, as though asking permission with every movement. Victoria rested her head against his shoulder. The wind brushed lightly across her skin, and the music wrapped around them like a soft blanket. They swayed slowly, bodies aligned, breaths steady. Miles watched them from the lounge seat, his little legs kicking in rhythm as he clapped out of pure joy, as if he sensed something special happening. Christopher whispered, "You feel different?" "In a good way?" she asked quietly. "In the best way," he said. "I used to hold you because I was afraid of losing you. Now I hold you because I respect what it took for us to get here." Victoria closed her eyes, letting the weight of his words settle in her chest. This wasn't a man offering empty sentences. This was a man shaped by remorse, reflection, and genuine change. "I'm proud of us," she murmured. "So am I." Their steps grew smaller, slower, until they weren't really dancing anymore, just embracing, connected in a stillness that spoke louder than movement. Christopher brushed his lips against her forehead. "Vic, thank you. For what?" "For not letting our story end where it broke," he said. "You had every right to walk away forever, but you didn't. You gave me space to rebuild myself. You let me prove I meant every word, and you trusted me again. That's not small, that's everything." Victoria swallowed softly. "I didn't do it for you," she whispered. "I did it for our son. But somewhere along the way I realized I missed the version of you who used to fight for us, and recently I saw him again, steadier, more mature, more intentional." He nodded slowly. "I'm still learning. I'll always be learning, and that's all I need," she replied. As the song faded into the next track, Miles crawled across the rooftop until he reached Victoria's leg. He tugged gently at her dress, wanting to be included. Christopher scooped him up with a smile. "Come here, little man," he said, lifting Miles between them. Victoria kissed the top of their son's head. "You just wanted in on the dance, didn't you?" Miles laughed, babbling something that sounded very much like agreement. The three of them stayed linked, mother, father, child, moving slowly to the rhythm, forming a single silhouette against the sparkling Atlanta backdrop. This was the family they once almost lost. This was the family they chose to become again. After a few minutes, Christopher spoke softly. "Vic, can I say something without it sounding too deep?" She smirked. "Go ahead." I know people talk about redemption like it's some huge dramatic transformation, he said. But to me, redemption has looked like waking up every day and choosing to be accountable, choosing to show up, choosing to love in ways that are quiet and consistent. Victoria looked up at him, her eyes warm. That's exactly why it works. He nodded. Today reminded me of something important. You don't fix a broken bond by pretending the cracks never existed. You fix it by building around them. Stronger, wiser, more intentional. She rested her head on his chest. That's our story, and it always will be, he replied. The music shifted into another mellow track as the sky deepened into twilight. Miles finally settled, resting his head on Christopher's shoulder, thumb in his mouth, eyelids drooping. Victoria laughed softly. Looks like someone's had a long day. Christopher kissed their son's forehead. He was the best ring bearer in the world. That he was, she agreed. They walked toward the rooftop stairs, but before they left, Victoria turned to look back one more time, the city shining beneath the evening sky, the quiet breeze rustling the edges of the rooftop plants, the speakers softly humming in the background. This place had once been a symbol of heartbreak. Now it was a symbol of healing, a symbol of resilience, a symbol of love that didn't end where it stumbled. Christopher wrapped an arm around her as they stepped toward the door. Vic? Yeah, thank you. For my second chance. She leaned into him. Thank you for earning it. The rooftop door closed gently behind them. Their footsteps echoed down the hallway, slow, steady, united. A family walking into the rest of their life. Sometimes the hardest part of healing is allowing yourself to believe that growth is possible. I've learned that people don't always change because they're asked to. They change because life humbles them, teaches them, and gives them reasons to become better. If you've ever offered forgiveness or wished someone forgave you, share your experience below. You never know. Your story might give someone the courage to try again.